On a quiet October afternoon, 18-year-old Zoe Hastings drove out to return a movie and attend church, promising her parents she'd be back for dinner. Hours later, her family would be left searching, with no trace of their beloved daughter. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, where she was the eldest of 5 children. She had a strong, loving relationship with her parents and was known for always helping care for her younger siblings. The Hastings family shared a deep religious faith, and much of their time was spent together at church. Zoe, a naturally creative individual, had a passion for drawing and participated in her school's theatrical productions. She was also an active member of her community, always ready to assist in any way she could. After graduating high school, Zoe decided to postpone university to focus on her church activities. By October 2015, at the age of 18, she was preparing for a mission trip and had eagerly anticipated her church's upcoming service on October 11th. That afternoon, around 4:40 p.m., Zoe left home with the intention of attending the church service and returning by dinner, a routine she had always followed. However, by 6:30 p.m., when Zoe hadn't returned, her parents grew concerned. This was unlike her. She always stayed in touch. They tried calling her several times, but received no response. With growing unease, they reached out to her friends, but no one had seen or heard from her. As the hours passed and the evening grew darker, Zoe's parents knew something was wrong. They contacted the police, but the uncertainty only deepened as they were told that Zoe hadn't shown up at church either. Desperate, her parents retraced Zoe's steps, beginning their search in the places she frequented, hoping to find any sign of her. As Zoe's parents continued their search, they decided to use an iPhone tracking app to locate her phone. The app showed that Zoe's phone was near a small creek, just a few hundred yards from the church. With their worry now at its peak, her parents rushed to the location, hoping for any sign that Zoe might have been there. When they arrived, they saw police cars and an ambulance already present. Initially, they were told that a car accident had occurred in the area, but the truth would soon become more horrifying than they could have imagined. Upon approaching the scene, officers informed them that the woman found near the creek was Zoe. But what they initially believed to be an accident was quickly confirmed to be a murder. Zoe's body was discovered near her partially submerged minivan, a few yards from the creek. The vehicle was still in the water, but it was clear that it was not an accident. There was blood near her body, and upon further examination, investigators found multiple stab wounds on Zoe's neck. The circumstances suggested a violent struggle had occurred, and the scene appeared much more brutal than initially thought. Zoe's dress had been moved, and her clothing was disarranged, indicating she had been assaulted before being killed. The discovery of a blood-covered knife near her body solidified the theory that Zoe's death was no accident. It became clear that this was a deliberate act of violence. The investigators would soon begin piecing together the evidence at the scene, but it was evident from the outset that Zoe had been murdered in cold blood, just hours after she left home, leaving her parents devastated and desperate for answers. With the discovery of Zoe's body, investigators quickly shifted their focus to identifying potential witnesses who might have seen anything suspicious in the area. The police gathered statements from people who might have been near the crime scene around the time of the murder. 2 key witnesses came forward with crucial information. The first witness, Lester Clark, worked at a nearby tattoo parlor. On the day Zoe disappeared, around 4:45 p.m., he went to buy cigarettes and noticed Zoe near the DVD rental service outside the Walgreens store. He saw her approaching her white minivan when a man suddenly stopped her from getting inside the vehicle. The man said something to Zoe before she entered the car, moving to the passenger seat. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, although he did not provide further details about his appearance. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, was across the street from the parking lot at around the same time. He observed a similar scene. The man stopped Zoe from entering the minivan, showed her something from his pocket, and then Zoe entered the car. Gary found the interaction suspicious and, concerned about what he had seen, tried to alert the authorities by asking a store clerk to call 911. However, it was unclear whether the clerk followed through with his request. Both witnesses described the same basic scenario, but neither could offer a precise identification of the suspect. Their testimonies, though crucial, did not give investigators a direct lead. Nevertheless, the fact that both men witnessed the same interaction raised suspicions and pointed investigators toward the possibility that Zoe had been forced into the car, marking the beginning of the investigation into the suspect. As the investigation into Zoe's murder progressed, forensic experts began analyzing the evidence found at the crime scene and on the victim's body. The presence of a blood-covered knife near Zoe's body became one of the key pieces of evidence. The knife was eventually linked to Antonio Cochran, the primary suspect, after DNA found on the handle matched his genetic profile. Though initially, forensic tests on hair and semen found at the scene couldn't definitively match Cochran, the discovery of his DNA on the murder weapon gave the investigation a significant breakthrough. Alongside the DNA evidence, investigators turned to other sources of information. They obtained phone records and GPS data, which placed Cochran's phone in the area near the Walgreens store, where Zoe had stopped before her disappearance. The GPS data from his phone connected to a tower covering the area at around 4:34 p.m., which coincided with the time Zoe was at the store. This information provided a critical link between Cochran and the crime scene, corroborating the witness statements that placed him in the area. Investigators also conducted a detailed analysis of the minivan Zoe had been driving. While they found no fingerprints inside the vehicle, the fact that all the doors, except the driver's, were locked suggested that the suspect either drove the vehicle himself or approached Zoe directly at the scene. The lack of fingerprints indicated that the suspect may have wiped the car clean after the murder, which further pointed to a deliberate attempt to erase evidence. The physical evidence, combined with a growing circumstantial case against Cochran, led investigators to focus on him as their prime suspect. However, they needed more concrete evidence to make an arrest and pursue a conviction. After matching DNA on the murder weapon to Antonio Cochran, investigators arrested him for the murder of Zoe Hastings. Although Cochran initially denied any involvement in the crime, the circumstantial evidence against him was overwhelming. During questioning, Cochran repeatedly maintained his innocence, but the growing body of evidence seemed to point directly to him. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from Cochran's phone records. Investigators discovered troubling text messages sent by him in the days leading up to the murder. The messages revealed a distressed mental state, indicating that he was struggling with personal turmoil. He had been emotionally affected by the death of his stepmother, which he mentioned in a message to his ex-girlfriend. He also admitted to having been drinking heavily and driving around the city the night before the murder, indicating a state of confusion and emotional distress. Further investigation into Cochran's whereabouts on the day of the murder revealed that his phone's GPS data placed him near the scene of the crime just minutes before Zoe's disappearance. His phone was connected to a nearby tower, placing him in the area when Zoe was last seen. Despite denying any involvement, Cochran's phone records and the matching DNA evidence provided a compelling case. Although he continued to deny the charges, Cochran's links to the crime scene through both physical and digital evidence led to his formal arrest. The investigation was far from over, but Cochran's arrest marked a critical point in the case as authorities prepared to bring him to trial. The trial of Antonio Cochran began with intense scrutiny as the prosecution presented a clear case based on the evidence gathered. The core of their argument was the DNA found on the knife, which had been used to fatally wound Zoe Hastings. Cochran's DNA on the weapon was a critical piece of the puzzle, alongside testimonies from witnesses who had seen him in the area around the time of the crime. The prosecution also pointed to the disturbing messages Cochran had sent to friends and family, reflecting his emotional state and possibly a prelude to the tragic events. Despite the compelling evidence, Cochran's defense team challenged the prosecution's case. They argued that the DNA evidence, while significant, was not enough to conclusively prove Cochran's involvement in the murder. They suggested that Cochran might have come into contact with the knife in an unrelated incident, such as a previous job where he sometimes handled items left behind by movie theater patrons, including knives. They also raised doubts about the credibility of the witnesses, particularly Gary Whitman, one of the key witnesses who had a criminal history. The defense attempted to weaken his testimony by emphasizing his background, arguing that it might affect his reliability. Furthermore, the defense contended that Cochran had an alibi, suggesting that he might have been with a friend during the time of the murder, although no substantial evidence was provided to support this claim. They attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's theory, arguing that the circumstantial evidence did not establish Cochran's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. They found Antonio Cochran guilty of murder, but did not convict him of a more serious charge of capital murder. This verdict was a significant moment in the case, as it brought some sense of justice to Zoe's family, although they had hoped for a more severe sentence. Despite the doubts raised by the defense, the jury concluded that Cochran was responsible for Zoe's tragic death. After days of deliberation, the jury found Antonio Cochran guilty of murder, but opted not to convict him of capital murder. The decision was a pivotal moment in the case, as it meant Cochran would face life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. While the verdict provided some closure, it also left the Hastings family with mixed emotions. They had hoped for a capital murder conviction, which would have resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Cochran would never be released. Instead, they were left with the uncertainty of a potential future parole hearing. Zoe's family, particularly her father Jim, expressed both relief and frustration. While they were grateful that Cochran would spend the rest of his life in prison, they felt the outcome did not fully reflect the severity of the crime. Jim Hastings, in an emotional statement, expressed how the loss of his daughter had affected their lives, and he stressed that no punishment could truly make up for the pain they had endured. The family also took a moment to thank the police, the prosecution team, and the witnesses who had contributed to seeking justice for Zoe. During the sentencing, the prosecution highlighted the strength and resilience of the Hastings family, who had endured unimaginable grief. The case brought attention to the tragic reality that violence could strike even in the most ordinary of moments, and that no amount of preparation could protect loved ones from such devastating loss. Despite the mixed feelings surrounding the verdict, the sentencing marked the end of a long and painful journey for the Hastings family. They had fought for justice for Zoe, and while the legal system had delivered a verdict, the emotional toll of losing their daughter would remain with them forever. The murder of Zoe Hastings left an indelible mark on her family, friends, and the broader Dallas community. While justice was served, the case also shed light on the vulnerability of young women and the random nature of violence in everyday life. The trial sparked important conversations about the effectiveness of circumstantial evidence in securing convictions, especially when key pieces of physical evidence are questioned or inconclusive.